My name is Andrew Burton. I work as a professional photojournalist, and for the past 10 days, I've been on assignment in Japan for USA Today, working along the northeastern coastline, covering the damaged communities affected by the tsunami and earthquake that struck on March 11th. Starting on March 17th, we worked in the community of Kesennuma. We walked into the community center and found people looking at the missing persons board. People were shuffling through and quietly glancing at papers, searching for names and messages of their loved ones. In that same room, a man was seated at a desk sobbing. He was crying quietly into his hands and looking about. He was one of the few people expressing emotion, and in my experiences in the past 10 days, the Japanese people have been very reserved. Later in the day, on March 17th, we visited two refugee centers that were set up in the town of Kesennuma and moved through the environments pretty slowly. You could tell that the people that were now situated there were attempting to make homes out of the blankets and mattresses that they had been given, and setting up new living environments in corners and stretches of wall that they had been given in the junior high school and high school. An elderly woman who was walking with a cane had gotten up and was moving about, and she stopped briefly to look out the window. On March 18th, we went to the town of Ishinomaki. This was a port town that is just northeast of Sendai. We had found a woman along the streets calling out into a house. She was trying to gain entrance into the house, and it was, to my understanding, her house, but due to rubble that was blocking the entrance and the windows, she was too afraid to enter. She eventually approached the army, and the Japanese army moved into the home. Myself and another photographer followed the army. In this particular image, a member of the Japanese army is leaving a room after he's deemed that no one is inside. And in this situation, I stepped inside of a person's living room to try and get a sense of what had been their living space and what it had since become. I found that as I moved through these completely and totally decimated landscapes, that you try and find smaller details that try and suggest the devastation in more subtle ways or more quiet ways. Later in the day, we followed the army as they collected numerous bodies that had been recovered. In this particular situation, one woman's body had been recovered, and we waited until the army arrived and gently wrapped her in a blue tarp. I was particularly touched with how caring they were with each body. They handled each person with as much grace and dignity as possible, and often assigned 6 to 8 people to move each body. These were pretty difficult situations to photograph in, and were both emotionally and psychologically taxing. This was a section of road that we had driven down only a few hours before, but due to the way that the ground had shifted and the way the tide was coming in, the stretch of road had since been covered by probably a solid foot of water. I found one particular family that had returned to their car. The entire family had survived the tsunami, but this was the first day that they had gone and found their destroyed car, which had been flipped over and half buried in mud, and they were going to recover belongings that had been inside the car. In this case, the mother's wallet and her purse, and I believe her car registration, and some personal photos. Her brother-in-law laid on his back and pulled these objects out of the car. March 20th found us in the town of Rikuzen Takada. In this town, there was a emergency refugee center. People were incredibly inviting, very kind. This photo was taken while lunch was being served. The next photo again is taken in Rikuzen Takada on March 20th. This is a missing persons board, and you can see even 10 days after the tsunami had hit that people were still hoping to find someone, hoping to find their loved ones, hoping to hear new news about the people that they loved and lost. Came across a family that had returned to the foundation of their home while their immediate family, the mother and father and their two daughters, they had all survived. The father's grandmother had passed away, and in this specific moment, I found them as they laid out a prayer offering to her soul and then prayed on the foundation of their home. At this point, dusk had already passed and night was really setting in. The walls of the debris were higher than the cars as we drove through. In this situation, a car was just slowly driving through the rubble. On March 21st, we found ourselves again in the town of Kesanuma. In this specific instance, I photographed a man named Koju Onoderu. He was on the second floor of his home cleaning out the rubble, and he was throwing things out the window. He said he and his wife had survived, and as I photographed him cleaning up his home, he saved a few articles that seemed salvageable, but for the most part threw the vast majority of his possessions out the window because they had been destroyed and were at this point worthless. We drove through Kesanuma trying to find new angles on the story. We found a Buddhist temple that was doubling as an emergency refugee center. I photographed lunch being served. And this specific image is taken in Moriyoshi. This man's name is Ijiro Miura. Yeah, he is 91 years old. This was the town that he lived in his entire life. Mr. Miura explained what his community had been like and what his town looked like, and he just seemed in shock and awe as he walked through the decimated town. Flattened. I didn't see too many images of either sadness or hope. I think people were just in a daze. We've just found people wandering about their the the towns that they grew up in, they lived in, and wandering about their communities, almost like ghosts. They don't seem to be taking a lot of action or have a lot of cause. They're just wandering about trying to fathom what has occurred. I don't think any images can truly convey the absolute destruction that these coastal towns and villages suffered.